I am Sergeant Nicole Palmer, a nurse at the VA Medical Center. I'm used to making split-second life and death decisions. But that night, at the Drayton estate, I was unprepared for this interrogation. When I walked in, 17 minutes late, my boyfriend, Elliot, hissed through clenched teeth, 17 minutes. Your heroics on the battlefield won't save you here. The other guests, a U.S. senator, a defense contractor, looked at me like I was something they'd just scraped off their shoe. They scoffed at my work, calling the VA a place for the government's charity cases. They didn't know that those 17 minutes were a test. And they didn't know that the most powerful woman in that room, the one judging me, was the very person I had saved at a Walmart just an hour before. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been looked down on and judged by the very people you thought should understand you the most. It started the moment my windshield wipers gave up the fight against the Maine snowstorm. The drive to the Drayton estate in Portland was treacherous, a bitter wind whipping off the black water of the bay. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel of my 10-year-old Honda. When I finally reached their property, massive black iron gates slowly opened, not like a welcome, but like the entrance to a fortress or a prison. And he was waiting. Elliot was standing on the steps, silhouetted against the blinding light of the foyer. He wasn't rushing out to help me or open my door. He was just waiting, angry. I got out, the icy wind tearing at my coat. Elliot, I'm so sorry. The snow was awful and there was a fender bender on the I-95 ramp. He didn't even look at my face. His eyes went straight to his watch, a Tag Heuer he was so proud of. 6:17, he snapped. 17 minutes, Nicole. I know, I tried to call. She hates disrespect. You know my mother hates disrespect. I stopped, the snow melting on my face, stinging my skin. Disrespect, not danger, not concern. Disrespect. I tried to explain again. I had to stop, Elliot. It was important. He finally looked at me, his gaze as cold as the marble steps. Your heroics on the battlefield won't save you here. That line, it hit me harder than the freezing Maine wind. It was a physical blow, right to the chest. This was the man who said he loved me, the man who knew what my service meant. And in one sentence, he dismissed it all as heroics that had no place in his world. He grabbed my arm, pulling me inside. Fix your hair. You look windswept. The moment I stepped inside, the sound of the storm vanished. It was replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The Drayton home wasn't a home. It was an ice palace, a museum. Everything was marble and dark wood, polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the cold light of chandeliers. There were no photos. There was no clutter. Just vast, empty, expensive space. And the eyes. Dozens of them. The 1% of Portland, Maine. Men in tailored suits, women in quiet, expensive silks and cashmere, holding delicate wine glasses. They all turned. The low hum of chatter stopped. They looked at me. They looked at my simple, navy blue dress. The only good dress I owned. They looked at my damp hair, which I had pulled back into its usual tight military bun. I felt like an infantryman who had stumbled into a general's strategy meeting. I was out of uniform, out of place, and clearly unwelcome. And then I saw her. At the far end of the cavernous room, standing by a fireplace that gave off no noticeable heat, was Evelyn Drayton. She was exactly as Elliot had described her, tall, elegant, and unmoving. She wasn't watching me, she was commanding the room. She had the posture of a general. Elliot, suddenly all smiles, left my side and hurried toward her, already performing. Mother, so sorry, the storm is just dreadful. He was schmoozing, laughing too loud at something a man with a booming voice, who I recognized as Senator Hayes, had said. Evelyn ignored him. Her eyes found me, and she began to move. She glided across the floor, and as she turned into the light, I forgot how to breathe. My heart didn't just stop, it seized. It wasn't her face, it was what was on her shoulders. Draped over her expensive emerald green silk blouse was a scarf. A coarse, slightly frayed, hand-knitted red wool scarf. My scarf. The scarf I had knitted myself during a long deployment. The scarf I had worn into the Walmart not an hour ago. The scarf I had taken off and given to a desperate, shivering, homeless-looking old woman who couldn't pay for her groceries. My mind couldn't make sense of it. The two images, the freezing parking lot, the opulent mansion, smashed together. Elliot, oblivious, was still trying to impress the senator, not even noticing the cognitive dissonance that was making my head spin. Evelyn Drayton stopped directly in front of me. Her eyes were a pale, piercing blue. She gave the faintest, thinnest smile. "Welcome, Sergeant Palmer," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "You are almost on time." The word almost hung in the air, a perfectly executed cut. Dinner was a trial. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to Elliot, who refused to make eye contact. The clinking of heavy silver on bone china was the only loud sound. The interrogation began, led not by Evelyn, but by the senator's wife, a woman whose pearls looked heavier than my service weapon. "Elliot tells us you work at the VA, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Yes, ma'am. I'm a nurse at the Harborview VA." She winced, taking a delicate sip of wine. "Oh, how challenging." "My husband," she gestured to the senator, who was busy laughing with Elliot, "always says he supports the troops, of course, but that the VA is just a budget black hole. Full of addicts and government charity cases, isn't it?" My blood went hot. I thought of Murphy, a Vietnam vet who came in 3 times a week just to have someone to talk to. I thought of the young woman, just 22, who lost both her legs in Iraq. Charity cases. Before I could answer, Evelyn Drayton spoke from the head of the table. Her voice cut through the chatter effortlessly. "A fascinating choice, Sergeant. What do you like about helping those who cannot seem to help themselves?" The entire table went quiet. It was a direct question, a test. I lifted my chin. I looked straight down the table, past the flickering candles, and met her gaze. I gave her the same answer I would give a commanding officer. "Sometimes they help me remember who I am, ma'am." A flicker of something passed through Evelyn's eyes. Elliot panicked. He let out a nervous laugh and squeezed my thigh under the table, hard. "Ha! That's my Nick. Always so modest. But she's actually moving into management soon. Out of the, out of the trenches. No more getting her hands dirty." I stared at him. We had never discussed this. Never. Evelyn Drayton picked up her wine glass. She looked at Elliot's flushed, eager-to-please face. Then she looked at me. She took a slow sip. "How convenient," she whispered. And as she said it, her hand idly stroked the coarse, red wool of my scarf. My stomach turned to ice. I wasn't at a dinner. I was in an ambush, and I had no idea why. My hand, resting on the polished mahogany table, was trembling. I clenched it into a fist. That scarf. It wasn't just a scarf. It was a memory. It was a promise. And seeing it draped over the silk shoulders of Evelyn Drayton felt like a sacrilege, a violation of something holy. My mind left the cold dining room, left the staring, judging eyes, and flew halfway across the world, back to a winter deployment in Afghanistan. The cold there wasn't the damp, biting cold of a Maine winter. It was a high desert, bone-deep freeze that seeped through every layer. Our base was a windswept collection of HESCO barriers and tents, and the nights were endless. I was a medic, a sergeant, and I was in charge of more than just wounds. I was in charge of morale. I had knitted that scarf in the dim, green-tinged light of the aid station. My fingers were clumsy in gloves, but I kept at it, loop by loop. It was made of the cheapest, roughest red wool I could get from the PX. It was never meant for me. It was for a kid from Ohio named Price. Private first class, barely 20. He was all elbows and optimism, with a picture of his high school girlfriend taped inside his helmet. He was the one who always volunteered for the worst details, the one who could make the other soldiers laugh, even when we were all miserable. And he was always cold. I gave it to him one night after a patrol. "Here," I'd mumbled, shoving it at him. "Don't want you freezing to death before you even see any action." He'd looked at it like I'd handed him a bar of gold. He wrapped it around his neck, the bright, almost obnoxious red a stark contrast to his camouflage. "Thanks, Sarge." He'd grinned, his breath pluming in the air. It's real." That's what it was. In that place of sterile, government-issued uniformity and brutal, inhuman rules, that rough piece of wool was a symbol. It was a piece of the real person. A moment of human care in the middle of an environment designed to strip it away. He wore it every day. That scarf was a symbol of humanity. But it became the symbol of a scar just 2 weeks before our deployment ended. Price wasn't the same optimistic kid. He'd become quiet, withdrawn. The letters from home had gotten thinner. Then, one night, I found him sitting alone outside the wire, just staring into the dark. "What's going on, Price?" I asked, sitting beside him on the frozen dirt. He didn't look at me. He just pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket. It was from his mom, back in Ohio. "My dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "He lost his job at the auto plant. Been out of work 6 months." I waited. I knew this story. They missed the payments," he continued, his voice thick. "The bank? They foreclosed, Sarge." My blood ran colder than the air. Foreclosure. The word was an obscenity out here. He finally looked at me, his eyes hollow in the moonlight. "They're taking everything. My mom and my little sister. They're moving into my aunt's basement. I'm over here fighting for this, and they're taking my family's home." He choked back a sob, his shoulders shaking. "They take everything, Sarge. They take everything." That line, "they take everything." It was a whisper that became a permanent echo in my mind. It was an indictment. He wasn't just fighting an enemy overseas, he was being betrayed by the world he'd sworn to protect. A world of banks and contracts and politicians, people like the ones sitting at this very dinner table. I didn't know what to say. I just sat with him. I, his sergeant, his medic, his leader, had no words. What good was a rifle against a foreclosure notice? 2 weeks later, an IED. It was a routine patrol, just a simple route clearance. But the blast was massive. When we got to the convoy, it was chaos. Smoke, screaming, the smell of diesel and fire. Price was bad. I was with him. I did everything I could. I worked on him for 20 minutes, my hands covered in his blood, refusing to stop, even after he was gone. I kept pumping his chest, screaming at him to come back. But I couldn't save him. I couldn't save him from the IED. And I couldn't save him from the cold, hard indifference back home that had broken his spirit long before the bomb broke his body. When I came back stateside, I was done. Done with the sand, done with the war. But I wasn't done with the vow. The U.S. Army has a creed: leave no one behind. I'd upheld it on the battlefield. But Price had shown me that the battlefield was everywhere. It was in Ohio. It was in the stack of foreclosure papers on a kitchen table. It was in the VA hospital in Portland, Maine. That's why I chose to work at the Harborview VA. It wasn't charity, as that woman at the table had spat. It wasn't a budget black hole. It was a promise. It was my silent vow to Price. I would not leave another soldier behind, not on my watch. Which brought my mind spinning, back to the present, or rather, back to just a few hours ago, before this whole disastrous night began. I was standing at my locker at the VA. My 12-hour shift was over. My feet ached, and I smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. I was already dreading this dinner. I'd checked my phone. There was a text from Elliot. "Wear the blue dress, not the one with the flowers. And please, look appropriate. This is my mother." Appropriate. I opened my locker, and there it was. After Price died, they'd sent his personal effects home. But the red scarf, it had been in my medical kit. I'd washed the blood out, but I could never bring myself to get rid of it. It was my scarf again, a reminder. I looked at it, hanging on the hook. It was coarse, it was too bright, it was hand-knitted and imperfect. It was everything the Drayton world was not. I knew Elliot would hate it, he would be embarrassed by it. He wanted me to be appropriate, to be a quiet, polished accessory. I grabbed the scarf. I told myself, "Be yourself, Nicole. Just be yourself. I wrapped it around my neck. It was an act of silent resistance, a small wool-knit reminder of who I was, of the world I came from, before I walked onto the polished, hostile battlefield of his family's home. And now, here it was, draped over the shoulder of the woman who was judging me, the woman who looked at me like I was dirt. My silent resistance had been captured. It had been turned into a trophy. A cold, sick feeling washed over me as I sat there at the Drayton table. That woman, Evelyn, was wearing my vow like a fashion accessory. The memory of Price, of that cold base in Afghanistan, evaporated, leaving me back in the overly lit, humming fluorescent reality of the Harbor View VA Medical Center. It was 4 p.m., 1600, in my head. My 12-hour shift was over. My feet ached with a dull, familiar throb inside my work sneakers. My hands, scrubbed raw dozens of times, carried the faint, sharp smell of antiseptic. It was the smell of my life. I was tired. But it was a good tired. I'd just spent the last 45 minutes with Mr. Harrison, a Marine vet from the First Gulf War. He'd come in for a routine checkup and had a full-blown panic attack, what we call a GTV, or ground truth vet panic, right in the waiting room. A car backfiring on the street outside had sent him right back to Kuwait. I'd sat with him, not as a nurse, but as a sergeant. I didn't coddle him. I sat on the floor, eye level, and just talked. Talked about the terrible coffee, about the Red Sox, about anything but the war, until his breathing slowed and his eyes finally focused. Until he came back. "You're okay, Marine," I told him, helping him up. "You're here." "Thanks, Sarge," he'd mumbled, wiping his face. You get it. I get it. That's what mattered. In this building, I wasn't an outcast. I wasn't inappropriate. I was Sarge. My past wasn't something to be hidden. It was my greatest asset. This was my world, my purpose. This was where I made a difference. I signed off on my charts, grabbed my bag from my locker, and finally checked my personal phone. The screen was lit up. One new email. One new text. The email was from Evelyn Drayton. I opened it. There was no greeting, no "Dear Nicole," or "Hope you're having a good day." It was 3 lines of cold black text. Subject: tonight. Formal dinner, 6 p.m. sharp. Attendance is required. That was it. Not an invitation, but a summons. A direct order. It was a command issued from a superior officer, only it lacked the fundamental respect that's supposed to come with the rank. I felt a small hot prickle of annoyance. Attendance is required. Who did she think she was? Then, the text message. It was from Elliot. "I'm downstairs. Don't be late." I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. The good, satisfied feeling from helping Harrison was already fading, replaced by the familiar anxiety that always seemed to precede seeing Elliot's family. I walked out of the double doors, the warm, noisy air of the hospital lobby hitting me. I saw him leaning against his sleek black Audi, parked in the fire lane, right by the main entrance. He was checking his watch. He looked up as I approached, his face a mask of impatience. No kiss, no, "Hi, babe." He didn't hug me. He didn't even smile. He just looked past me, over my shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone important was watching. "It's 4:05, he said. "The dinner is at 6. You're cutting it close." "I just finished a 12-hour shift, Elliot," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I know," he said, opening his passenger door for me. "Which is why I came. I brought you something. To help. I figured you'd be stressed." For a second, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe he did see me. Maybe he'd brought me a coffee, or just 5 minutes of peace. I got in the car. The smell of new leather and expensive cologne filled my nose, a stark contrast to the hospital's antiseptic. "What is it?" I asked. He walked around, got into the driver's seat, and handed me a single, crisp, folded piece of high-quality resume paper. "I just wrote down a few things," he said, not looking at me, already pulling the car into traffic. "To help you prepare. Just bullet points." I unfolded the paper. At the top, in a bold serif font was a title. Mission Directive. Drayton Dinner. I stared at it. Mission Directive? Was this a joke? I read on. He had broken the evening down into sections. Parking and arrival. Acceptable topics of conversation. And, I kid you not, refreshment etiquette. My eyes scanned the page, my blood getting hotter with every word. Do not speak unless spoken to by mother. Compliment the food, but do not ask what it is. Laugh at Senator Hayes's jokes. He likes that. And then I saw the last section. It was titled, in all caps, Forbidden Zone. My stomach clenched. There were 3 bullet points. The third one, the last one on the page, was this. No war stories. My breath caught. It was just typed out, cold and impersonal. But next to it, Elliot had added a note, handwritten in his neat, expensive pen script. Mother finds it boastful and inelegant, best to avoid. Boastful and inelegant. Price, the IED, the blood, the 12-hour shifts, the panic attacks, Mr. Harrison. My entire identity, my whole life, the very core of who I was inelegant. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. It was a horrible, bitter sound. Elliot glanced over, annoyed. What's so funny? What am I, Elliot? I whispered, looking at the paper. What am I, if not a soldier? He sighed, that impatient, put-upon sound he made when I was being difficult. Nicole, don't be dramatic. It's just one night. I need this to go well. He merged onto the highway, his movements sharp and precise. Tonight, you don't need to be a soldier. Tonight, you just need to be my girlfriend. He paused and then added the words that stopped my heart. A silent girlfriend. A silent girlfriend. An accessory. A prop. Something to be seen and not heard. Something that wouldn't be boastful or inelegant. It's amazing, isn't it? The people who are supposed to love you the most are often the first to ask you to be smaller. If you've ever been made to feel like you had to hide a part of yourself to be appropriate for someone, please support this story with a like and comment "I see you" down below. Because in that moment, I felt completely invisible. I didn't say another word. I just looked down at the mission directive in my hands. The man I loved had just handed me a script on how to erase myself. Slowly, deliberately, I folded the piece of paper. I didn't crumple it. I folded it neatly, right on the original creases until it was a small, thick square. I slipped it into the side pocket of my wallet, zipping it shut. It felt heavy like a stone. Like evidence. Evidence for a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. That folded-up piece of paper, Elliot's mission directive, was sitting in my wallet like a shard of ice. His final words, a silent girlfriend, echoed in my head, stinging more than the antiseptic on my raw hands. He wanted me to hide my past. He called my life, my service, inelegant. The bitter irony is that my inelegant past was the only reason I was surviving this one. The reason Elliot's coldness didn't shatter me right there in the car was because of what had happened just an hour earlier, before he'd even arrived. Before the email from his mother. Before the 12-hour shift had even ended. It was earlier that day during my morning rounds at the VA. My family, my real family, doesn't share my blood. They share my experiences. They are the men and women who walk the halls of the Harborview VA. And the patriarch of this dysfunctional, loving family is Murphy. Murphy is a Vietnam vet in his late 70s. He's all gristle and sharp angles with a tongue that could strip paint. The younger nurses are terrified of him. He's notoriously cussed out 3 different residents. He complains about everything, all the time, and he's my favorite patient. I was walking the ward, clipboard in hand, when I heard his familiar gravelly bark from room 3B. Sarge, I stopped. No one else calls me that. The other nurses are Nicole or Ms. Palmer. To the doctors, I'm Palmer. But to Murphy, I am, and always will be, Sarge. He says it's a sign of respect. I ducked into his room. He was sitting up in bed, scowling at the sunrise. This coffee, he growled, pointing to his mug, tastes like burnt hell. I smiled. It was our daily ritual. Morning, Murphy. It can't be that bad. It's an insult to the bean, he grumbled. I reached into the pocket of my scrubs and pulled out a Hershey's bar with almonds, his favorite. I'd been keeping a stash just for him. Here, I said, tossing it onto his tray. Eat this. It'll cut the bitterness. He snatched it, his eyes softening just a fraction as he fumbled with the wrapper. He took a bite, chewed, and nodded. Acceptable. He looked at me, his gaze sharp and assessing. Murphy didn't just look at you, he saw you. You look tired, Sarge, he said. It wasn't a question. Long shift. No, he said, shaking his head. Not that, you've got that look, the outside look, dealing with the civilians. I must have let my guard down because he caught it instantly. I was thinking about the impending dinner with Elliot's family. The dread must have been written all over my face. Murphy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know, he said, tapping his temple. You got the eye. The soldier's eye. You see the whole field. They can't train that into you. You either got it or you don't. He took another bite of the chocolate bar. Don't let those stupid bastards out there take it from you. A lump formed in my throat. This man, this cussed, difficult, broken man who had seen the worst of humanity in a jungle halfway around the world, who had come home to a country that didn't want him. He saw me. He saw my value. He named it. And then there was Elliot, the man who supposedly loved me, the man who had everything, the education, the money, the perfect family. And all he wanted was for me to hide that very same part of myself. That small moment with Murphy was everything. It was the armor I didn't know I'd need. It was a prophecy. Don't let those stupid bastards out there take it from you. And now, sitting in Elliot's car just a few hours later, I realized he was one of them. My shift officially ended at 4:15 p.m. I'd finished my charting, changed out of my scrubs, and grabbed my bag. I did my final checkout, saying goodbye to the other nurses at the station. On my way out, I stopped by Murphy's room. He was watching some game show on his small TV, yelling at the contestants. I'm heading out, Murphy, I said from the doorway. He just grunted, not taking his eyes off the screen. Yeah. I was about to leave, but he called out one last time. Hey, Sarge. I turned back. He looked at me, his face serious again. That soldier's eye of his was locked right on me. Good luck out there, he said, his voice quiet. It's a jungle, I nodded. See you tomorrow, old man. As I pushed open the heavy doors of the VA and stepped out into the biting wind, I felt a profound sense of loss. It was an almost physical ache. I felt like I was leaving my real family, my sanctuary, my home, to go have dinner with strangers. Strangers I was supposed to call family, strangers who had already issued their terms of surrender. I left the VA, left my real family, and walked into the parking lot. The mission directive was a cold square in my wallet. Elliot's words, a silent girlfriend, were a fresh wound. My car, a practical paid-off Subaru, felt like a dinghy next to his Audi. He'd already driven off. I was to meet him there. I pulled out onto the road, the clock on my dashboard reading 16:40. 4:40 p.m. I had an hour and 20 minutes to drive 30 miles in what was quickly becoming a Maine snowstorm. The sky was a low, oppressive, steel gray. The wipers were already struggling to keep up. I merged onto I-95, joining the sea of red taillights. The pressure was immense. It was a physical weight on my chest. Elliot's voice was a recording in my head, a constant looping threat. If you're late, she'll never forget it. Don't be dramatic, Nicole. A silent girlfriend. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This wasn't a dinner, it was an inspection, and the mission directive in my wallet proved it. I was a piece of equipment being vetted, not a person being introduced. The snow was coming down harder now, thick and wet, making the roads slick. My old Subaru handled it, but I couldn't go fast. The clock ticked. 17:15, 5:15 p.m. I was running calculations in my head. 30 more minutes if traffic holds. 10 minutes to park, 5 to find the coat room. Walk in exactly at 18 rows. And that's when I saw it. The empty passenger seat. Oh, God. I'd forgotten the gift. In all the stress of the 12-hour shift, the mission directive, and the argument in my head, I'd forgotten the one, simple, required piece of social armor. The hostess gift. The obligatory, meaningless bottle of wine. It was a stupid, silly mistake. But in their world, in Evelyn Drayton's world, it wasn't silly. It was a fatal error. It was disrespectful. It was inelegant. Elliot would be mortified. His mother would see it as the final proof that I was, as the senator's wife had said, nothing more than a charity case. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through my exhaustion. The clock, 17:25. Then, through the snow, I saw the sign. A giant, glowing blue and yellow beacon. Walmart. Next exit. I had no time. I couldn't stop. But I couldn't show up empty-handed. 5 minutes, I said out loud to the empty car. 5 minutes, in and out, a tactical decision. I yanked the wheel, the Subaru sliding a bit on the exit ramp. I pulled into the chaotic, slushy parking lot, weaving around abandoned shopping carts and people rushing through the snow. I parked in a fire lane. I didn't care. Clock, 17:30. I ran inside. The inside of the Walmart was a different kind of storm. The fluorescent lights were blindingly bright. It was loud. Babies crying, registers beeping, the overhead speaker announcing a price check on aisle 4. It was the frantic working-class chaos of America on a weeknight. It was the complete, total opposite of the silent, cold ice palace I was driving to. This was real. This was the world my patients at the VA lived in. I shoved my way through the crowd, power walking past the pharmacy and the garden center, heading for the small wine selection they kept near the groceries. Clock, 17:35. I grabbed the first decent-looking $20 Cabernet I saw. Perfect. I rushed to the checkout. The lines were impossibly long. Everyone in Portland was stocking up for the storm. I scanned the lanes and picked the one that looked shortest, tapping my foot, my anxiety vibrating under my skin. Come on, come on, come on. Then I saw her. The woman at the front of my line. She was old, maybe in her late 60s, wearing a thin coat that wasn't nearly warm enough for this weather. Her hands, wrinkled and red, were trembling as she pushed a small pile of change across the belt. I glanced at her cart. It wasn't full of junk food or luxuries. It was full of necessities. A large pack of diapers, 2 gallons of milk, a box of cereal, and a small white paper bag that I recognized from the pharmacy, an inhaler. The cashier, a young kid with a bored expression, finished scanning. That'll be $250, $80. $250, $80, he repeated, louder. The old woman's face, already pale with cold, crumpled. Oh, I have my card, she stammered, digging in her worn-out purse. She handed him a debit card. He swiped it. Beep, beep, beep. Declined, he said, not even looking at her. No, try it again, the woman pleaded. It should be in there. He swiped it again. Declined. The people in line behind me groaned. A man muttered, Jesus Christ. The old woman was frantic, her hands shaking so hard she dropped her purse. The contents spilled onto the floor, a tube of lipstick, some tissues, and a small plastic wallet insert for photos. As she bent down, fumbling to pick up her things, a single, wallet-sized photo slid out and landed face up at my feet. My breath stopped. It was a young woman, smiling, proud, in an army combat uniform. My blood turned to ice. The clock on the wall said 17:45. In my head, Elliot was screaming, If you're late, she'll never forget. In my heart, I heard Price's voice. They take everything, Sarge. This wasn't just an old woman. This was Price's mother. This was every forgotten Gold Star family. This was a soldier left behind. The cashier looked at the woman. Ma'am, you gotta step aside. You're holding up the line. I just... She was crying now, trying to count the coins in her hand. My iron discipline, the discipline to be on time, to follow Elliot's mission directive, to be appropriate. It shattered. The real discipline took over. The one that was tattooed on my soul. Leave, no, one. Behind. I stepped forward, past the woman. I didn't look at her. I looked at the cashier. I'll pay for it. He looked at me, annoyed. The whole thing? $250.80, I said, pulling out my own card. Nicole, I heard a voice whisper, my own voice. What are you doing? This is your rent money. I didn't care. I tapped the card. The light turned green. Put your change away, I said to the old woman, my voice firm. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shame and disbelief. I can't. I don't know. I looked at her thin, useless coat. I looked at the snow swirling outside, and I made my final decision. I unwrapped the red scarf from my neck, the scarf I had knitted in Afghanistan, the scarf I had worn as an act of resistance. I held it out to her. Here, I said, it's cold out there. She just stared at it. I didn't wait. I gently draped it over her shoulders, on top of her thin coat. Then I grabbed my bottle of wine. I walked out of the store. I didn't wait for a thank you. I didn't want one. I got in my car, the engine roaring to life. I threw the bottle of wine onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. I looked at the dashboard clock. 17:57, 6 o'clock. The dinner was in 3 minutes, and I was still in a Walmart parking lot. I was late. I had failed Elliot's test. I had failed Evelyn's. I had shown up with a cheap bottle of wine and no self-control. I was late. I was disrespectful. I was inelegant. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, the wipers fighting against the storm, I took my first deep breath of the day. And I felt relieved. I had failed their test. But I had just passed mine. The dinner was a blur. We are back in that dining room, at that long polished table. The rest of the night, after I'd arrived at 6:17 p.m., was a performance. I endured the condescending questions from the senator's wife. Oh, the VA, how? Quaint. I endured Elliot's passive-aggressive corrections. Nicole means she admires the work. She doesn't actually, And through it all, I endured the heavy, silent gaze of Evelyn Drayton from the head of the table. She, and she alone, had noticed the cheap Cabernet I'd brought, setting it on the sideboard with a look of mild distaste. She, and she alone, had not commented on my lateness, which was, somehow, more terrifying than if she had screamed. I sat there, a ghost in a navy blue dress, pushing food I couldn't taste around on a plate that probably cost more than my car payment. When the dessert plates were finally cleared, Evelyn dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, placed it on the table, and stood up. The entire table fell silent. Elliot, you and the senator can discuss your contracts in the parlor, she said, her voice cutting through the room. The rest of you, the staff will see you out. It was a dismissal, a general discharging her troops. Elliot, grateful for the escape, practically ran from the room, shooting me a look that said, "You're on your own." Evelyn's eyes, cold and gray as the Maine Ocean, found me. "Sergeant Palmer," she said, "my library." "Now." She didn't wait for a reply. She simply turned and walked away. I was left alone in the vast, empty dining room. My heart was pounding, a hard, fast drum against my ribs. This is it. The execution. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and followed her. The library was everything the dining room was, but darker, heavier. It was a shrine to power. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, filled with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been read. A massive fireplace, unlit. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, polish, and money. Evelyn was standing behind a desk the size of my Subaru, her back to me, looking out the window at the swirling snow. "Shut the door," she said without turning. I did. The click of the heavy latch sounded final. "Elliot is a fool," she said, her voice quiet, conversational. "He's weak. He believes a title and a checkbook are the same as power. He doesn't have the eye." My blood chilled. It was the exact same phrase Murphy had used. "He doesn't see what's right in front of him, she continued, finally turning to face me. Her face was an iron mask. And then I saw what was on her desk. My breath left my body. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It wasn't a wine stain. It wasn't my cheap bottle of Cabernet. Laid out on the gleaming, polished wood was my scarf. My rough, handmade, bright red wool scarf. It looked like a splash of blood in that cold, perfect room. Next to it were two photographs. One was a formal black and white portrait, framed in silver. It was a young woman, impossibly beautiful, in a vintage U.S. Army Nurse Corps uniform. Her bone structure was perfect. Her eyes were sharp, determined. It was Evelyn. A young Evelyn, from a different war, a different world. The second photo was a piece of cheap printer paper. It was grainy, a screenshot from a security camera, time-stamped 1751 that evening. It was a picture of the old woman at the Walmart counter, and it was her. It was Evelyn. The same eyes, the same aristocratic bone structure, hidden under a cheap hat and a layer of theatrical grime. Everything clicked. The card declined. The trembling hands, the perfectly timed photo of the soldier dropping from the wallet. My stomach twisted. The shock was so profound, it felt like a physical blow. "You," I whispered, my voice choking. "You were 17 minutes late," Evelyn said, her voice flat. "You arrived at 1817. She picked up the scarf. "You gave me this. You also paid $250.80 for my groceries." She stated it like a fact, like a line item in a budget report. I found my voice. The shock was turning, hardening into a cold, sharp rage I hadn't felt since basic training. "Why?" It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Evelyn looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not warmth, respect. "Because I had to know," she said, her voice precise, cold as steel. "My husband, the general, used to say that a soldier's true quality, their honor, is shown only when they think no superior is watching." Her words hit me. No superior is watching. She thought she was my superior. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. The email. The mission directive. Elliot's panic. The humiliation at dinner. The test. It was all a test. A sick, elaborate, manipulative game. The woman at Walmart wasn't real. The desperation wasn't real. The card declined was a lie. She had turned human suffering, the very thing I had dedicated my life to fighting, into a prop. Into a piece of theater to test the girl dating her son. I was no longer afraid. I was furious. "You staged it," I said. My voice wasn't loud, it was low, and it didn't shake. "You staged all of it." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, impressed by my tone. "I needed to see if you were just another gold digger, or if you were real." "Real?" I took a step toward the desk. I was on her territory, but I didn't care. "You think that was a test of me? You dressed up in poverty, you played at being desperate, just to see what I would do." The full scope of it hit me, the calculation, the cruelty. You used your son to control my arrival time. You used his weakness to make me inappropriate. You set me up to fail your social test, just to see if I would pass your moral one. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You, a woman who has never wanted for anything, dared to pretend to be one of the people I protect, the people Price died for. "Watch your tone, Sergeant," she warned. "No." I took another step, planting my hands on her desk, leaning in. "You don't get to give me orders." The power in the room shifted. It was no longer her library. It was a battlefield. "You wanted to know what a real soldier does when no one is watching? They do the right thing, not for a reward, not because they're being tested by some rich woman in a costume." I pointed at her. "You were wrong about one thing, Evelyn." Her eyes widened. No one called her Evelyn. "You were a superior. You were a veteran, an army nurse. I saw the photo. You were one of us. Which makes this 1,000 times worse." I tapped the security photo. "You weren't testing me. I was testing you, and you failed." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper, just as hers had. You are not my superior, and you have no honor. Have you ever been played in a game you didn't even know you were in? If you are as furious as I was in that moment, hit that like button and comment, "Game over," down below. I stood up straight. I had said my piece. I had reclaimed my ground. I looked at Evelyn Drayton. The iron mask was gone. The shock on her face was real. For the first time since I'd met her, the general looked small. Her face, for just a second, softened. It wasn't forgiveness. It was defeat. The silence in the library was a ringing in my ears. My accusation, "You have no honor," hung in the air between us, thick and heavy as the mahogany desk. Evelyn Drayton's face, which had been an iron mask for the entire night, had broken. The defeat I saw in her eyes was real. She wasn't a general anymore. She was just an old woman. She turned away from me, breaking the intense eye contact, and walked stiffly to the unlit fireplace. She leaned one hand on the marble mantel. "Honor," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, a word my son knows nothing about. She looked up. My eyes followed her gaze. Above the fireplace was a massive, oil-painted portrait. It was a man in a formal U.S. Army dress uniform, dark green and covered in ribbons. He was handsome, with a strong jaw and a kind, intelligent smile that was the complete opposite of Evelyn's cold precision. "That," she said, "is General Henry Drayton, my husband." She looked at the painting, but I got the feeling she was seeing the man. He was not like the boys you met at dinner. He was not a defense contractor. He was not a politician. He was a soldier, a real soldier. He believed in the uniform. He believed in the men he led. And he believed, truly believed, in the country he served. She paused, her fingers tracing the cold marble. "Henry had a saying," she said, her voice softening with memory. "He told it to me when I was just a young army nurse, complaining about the bureaucracy. He said, 'Evelyn, kindness is the only investment that never fails.'" I stayed silent. This was a confession. "When he passed," she continued, "he left behind more than a reputation. He left behind a fortune, and he left behind a mission, outlined in his will." She turned back to me, her eyes hard again, the brief moment of softness gone. "He created the Drayton Hope Fund. Its sole purpose was to support veterans, not with parades, with action. Funding for VA centers, mental health services, job placement, money to help families, like Price's family, families who lose everything while their soldiers are overseas." My heart ached. It was everything Price had needed. When Henry died, I was lost. I did not want to run a fund. I wanted to grieve. Elliot, my son, he was so eager. He had just graduated from business school. He was full of ideas. He and his partners. She spat the word partners like it was poison. I gave it to him. I gave him his father's legacy to manage, and I stepped back. She walked back to the desk, her steps heavy. It took me 5 years to realize my mistake. 5 years of charity galas and smiling photographs in the Portland Press Herald. 5 years of seeing Elliot's partners, the same men you saw at dinner tonight, getting richer. She picked up a thick, glossy report from her desk and threw it in front of me. It was the fund's annual report. "Go on," she said. "Look at it." I opened it. It was full of smiling politicians and stock photos of soldiers. And then I saw the financials, the administrative costs. My stomach turned. This is 91%, Evelyn said, her voice sharp. 91% of all donations go to administrative costs, to salaries, to consulting fees, to the gala. They spent more on catering last year than they gave to veterans. I was speechless. This wasn't a charity. It was a scam. "It is," she said, reading my mind. "A money-making machine. It's a PR fund for defense contractors. They donate, get a tax write-off, and Elliot uses the fund to lobby their friends in Washington. It is a joke." "And the veterans?" I whispered, feeling sick. "They get the fraction," she said. "The crumbs. Just enough to keep the IRS from shutting them down." She finally sat down, heavily, in her large leather chair. She looked every one of her years. I became a cynic, she said, her voice now flat, devoid of all emotion. I had a husband who was a saint, and a son who was a predator. I started to believe that everyone was fake, that everyone had a price, that honor was just a word on a painting. She looked at me, her eyes drilling into mine. And then, you came along. This stubborn, quiet, disrespectful girl from the VA, dating my son, a sergeant. You didn't fit, you didn't fawn over him, you didn't care about the money. I watched you at that first cocktail party. You stood in the corner, holding your drink like it was a grenade. I don't know what to say, I stammered. Don't say anything, she ordered. I couldn't figure you out. I needed to know if you were real, or if you were just better at the game than the others. So you staged it, I said, the rage returning. The test. It was in desperate act, she corrected me, her voice rising. I wasn't testing you, Sergeant. I was testing the world. I needed to know if selfless kindness still existed or if my husband's entire life was a lie. I needed to remember what kindness looked like. Her voice broke on the last word, and I almost felt pity for her, almost. But then, the final horrifying truth clicked into place. I thought back to Chapter 3. To the mission directive, to Elliot's note. Mother thinks military stories are boastful and inelegant. It wasn't that he thought they were inelegant. He didn't want me talking about my life, about Price, about the VA, about the real struggles of soldiers, because he was profiting from them. He wasn't embarrassed by me. He was afraid of me. He was afraid that this woman, his mother, would see the real soldier in me and compare it to the fake, corrupt man he had become. He was afraid I would find this out. The man I was dating. The man who had given me a key to his apartment. He was stealing from the very people I had sworn an oath to protect. Evelyn saw the realization dawning on my face. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. He knows. He knows what he's doing. He just doesn't have the stomach to admit it. She leaned forward. My son is about to marry a woman who is braver, stronger, and has more honor in her little finger than he will ever possess. She let that hang in the air. And he doesn't even know it. I stood there, my mind reeling from the betrayal. It was so much bigger than a 17-minute insult. It was a stolen legacy. Evelyn watched me, her judge mask slipping back on. The moment of vulnerability was over. This was strategy again. He lied to me, she said, her voice cold. He lied to his father's memory. And he lied to you, by omission, every single day. I just stared at her. What do you want from me? I want the truth, Evelyn said. I want to see, for the last time, who my son really is. She steepled her fingers. The real test isn't over, Sergeant. I'm hosting a small dinner party next week. My blood ran cold. No. Oh, yes, she said. A little family dinner, just the three of us. It was the longest week of my life. I went to work at the VA. I did my 12-hour shifts. I talked to Murphy about the terrible coffee. I helped a young Marine from the 3rd Battalion work on his new prosthetic. I lived my life. But underneath it all, a clock was ticking. Evelyn's words, just the three of us, were a promise and a threat. I had agreed. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it through. Maybe, after fighting so hard for a country, I needed to see a single, small battle won. I spent the week in a strange kind of alliance with Evelyn. We spoke twice, brief, tactical phone calls. She didn't ask about me. I didn't ask about her. We discussed him. It felt cold. It felt strangely like a mission briefing. When the night came, I didn't wear my navy blue dress. I wore a simple black sheath. I didn't wear my hair in a bun. I left it down. I was done trying to be a soldier, or a girlfriend, or anything else. I was just me. A witness. I arrived at 6:00 p.m., exactly on time. The scene was identical to that first night, a twisted kind of déjà vu. The same long mahogany table, polished to a mirror finish. The same crystal glasses, the same oppressive silence. But the power had changed. I was no longer the one being judged. Elliot arrived a few minutes after me. He walked in, smiling, and my stomach turned. He was so relieved. He genuinely believed this was a reconciliation dinner. He thought his mother, having had her test, was now welcoming me into the fold. He was carrying a small square box, wrapped in white ribbon, from one of the most expensive jewelers in Portland. "Nick," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm so glad we're doing this. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot, you know? All of us." He handed me the box. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the pressure. Mom can be intense. I didn't open it. I just set the expensive gift on the table beside my plate. "Thank you, Elliot." He beamed, missing the ice in my voice. He thought he had just bought his way out of his manipulation. Evelyn was seated at the head of the table. She said nothing. She just watched. The dinner was served. This time, I ate. I was calm. I was focused. Elliot, sitting between the two of us, was the only one talking. He chattered nervously about a new contract, a market trend, how the snow had finally let up. He was a man tap dancing on a landmine, and he had no idea. Finally, Evelyn set her fork down. The small clink of silver against china echoed in the room. Elliot stopped talking, mid-sentence. "Elliot, son," Evelyn began, her voice calm, almost gentle. Elliot relaxed, smiling. "Yes, Mom?" "I was in the library the other night, talking with Sergeant Palmer." Elliot's smile wavered. "I learned something very interesting," Evelyn continued, her eyes locked on him. "I heard that on the night of the party, you advised her not to tell any of her military stories." Elliot froze. His fork, halfway to his mouth, stopped. His face, which had been so animated, became a tight, white mask. "Mom, I don't know what she told you," he stammered. "But it was a misunderstanding. I just meant that this was a different crowd." "A different crowd?" Evelyn asked. "Or a crowd you were actively lying to?" "I wasn't lying," Elliot said, his voice rising, panicked. He turned to me, his eyes wide. "Nick, tell her. I was just trying to help you fit in." He turned back to his mother, desperation setting in. He was digging his own grave. "She was late, Mom," he said, trying to regain control, trying to shift the blame. "She was 17 minutes late. She was undisciplined. I told you, I was just trying to manage her. For you." Evelyn just stared at him. She let his words, his pathetic, blaming, cowardly words, hang in the air. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice dropping, becoming lethally quiet. "She was late." She paused. "But you failed to mention why, Elliot." Elliot's face went blank. "What?" "You didn't mention," Evelyn said, leaning forward, "that she was late because she stopped, in a snowstorm, to pay $250 for a homeless beggar at a Walmart." Elliot just stared, confused, trying to figure out the trap. A beggar? So what? That's just irresponsible. That's what I was talking." "You didn't let me finish, Elliot." Evelyn's voice was as sharp as a scalpel. "She paid $250 for a beggar at Walmart." She held his gaze. "That beggar was me." It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, and it was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The air in the room didn't just get thick, it evaporated. Elliot recoiled. He physically recoiled as if she had slapped him. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sick, grayish white. He looked from his mother to me and back to his mother. "What? No. But you... what?" He was coming apart, and Evelyn didn't stop. She wasn't done. "You thought I wanted perfection," she hissed, her voice rising with a cold fury I had never heard. "You thought I wanted polished shoes and on-time arrivals and a son who was a shark." She stood up. "I didn't want perfection, Elliot. I just wanted integrity." With a sudden, violent motion, she grabbed the glossy VA fund report from the sideboard and threw it onto the table. It skidded across the wood, scattering dessert forks, and stopped right in front of him. "And you," she roared. "You. You took your father's legacy, his honor, his kindness, and you turned it into a joke." Elliot collapsed. It wasn't a slow-motion thing. He just broke. He slumped in his chair, his body folding in on itself. The mask of the successful, powerful son was gone. All that was left was a terrified little boy. I, he babbled, tears welling in his eyes. I had to. The partners. It's just business, Mom. It's how the world works." "Not his world," Evelyn shouted, pointing to the portrait of the general in the hall. "I did it for you," Elliot suddenly shrieked, his voice cracking. "To impress you, to show you I wasn't just him, that I was realistic. I was smart. I was making money. Isn't that what you wanted?" He was crying now, openly, snot and tears running down his face. It was pathetic. Evelyn just stared at him, her face carved from stone, her disgust absolute. And then he looked at me. Across the table, the man who had told me my life was inelegant, the man who had given me a mission directive, the man who had just tried to buy my silence with a gift, looked at me. His eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. He was begging me to save him, to say something, to help him. I had spent a week imagining this moment. I thought I would feel anger. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel something. But looking at him, this broken, babbling, hollow man, I felt nothing. Nothing but a cold, empty pity. I just stared back at him. I said nothing. My silence was the verdict, and in that moment, Elliot Drayton knew it was over. After Elliot's collapse, the night ended. There was no more shouting, no more drama. The battle was over and the adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow, ringing silence. Elliot didn't look at either of us. He just wept. A broken, quiet, pathetic sound. Evelyn, her face like stone, simply pressed a button on an intercom I hadn't noticed. "Dimitri, please bring Mr. Drayton's car around. He is unwell." I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the dining room, through the cold museum-like foyer, and out the front door. The 17-minute insult felt like a lifetime ago. I didn't look back. The next day, a check arrived at the Harborview VA, delivered by a courier. It was for $250,000, made out to the Veterans Assistance Fund and signed by Evelyn Drayton. There was no note. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the week. I didn't hear from Elliot either. The silence was a relief. I went back to my life. I went back to my soldiers. Murphy complained about the coffee. I helped the young Marine, the one from the 3rd Battalion, take his first steps on his new prosthetic. This was real. The smell of antiseptic, the sound of men laughing at bad jokes, the quiet, stubborn courage of the people here. This was my world. The Draytons' world felt like a bad dream. Then, exactly 1 week after the verdict dinner, Evelyn called me, not an email, a call. "Sergeant Palmer," she said, her voice crisp. "My office, this afternoon, 1400. It wasn't a request, but this time it wasn't a command either. It was something else. Her office was not in the Ice Palace. It was in downtown Portland, in a sleek, modern high-rise overlooking the harbor. It was all glass and steel, the opposite of the heavy mahogany library. She was all business. When I walked in, she was signing a stack of documents. She didn't stand. She just pointed to a chair. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You're welcome." She finished her signature with a sharp, decisive stroke, then capped her pen. She slid a check across the desk. It was a personal check, written in her sharp, spiky handwriting. "This," she said, "is for the VA. $5 million. It's the first installment." My breath caught. That was life-changing money. That was new equipment, more staff. That was hope. The Drayton Hope Fund is being restructured, she said, her voice cold. My son and his partners have been removed. Their legal team is handling the transition. I see. Which brings me to my next point. She slid a folder across the desk. This is an employment contract. The fund needs a new director, someone to manage the allocations, someone to ensure the money goes where my husband intended it to go. Someone with the eye. She looked at me. The position pays $300,000 a year. It's yours. Help me fix it. I looked at the contract. Director of the fund. A corner office. A salary that was more than I'd make in 5 years as a nurse. It was everything anyone could ever want. I looked at Evelyn. She was watching me, her face a mask of neutrality. But I knew what this was. It was another test. A different kind of test. I slid the check for $5 million back to her. The VA will be grateful for the donation, Evelyn. You can send it to their main office, but I can't accept it from you. I slid the folder with the contract back on top of it. And I don't want the job. Her mask cracked. She was shocked. I don't understand. This is a chance to do real good. More good than you can do. There. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You don't get it. You still think you can buy your way out of this. You think you can write a check, hire a director, and fix the honor you lost. I stood up. You can't buy back what you lost, Evelyn. You have to earn it, the same way I did. I walked to the window, looking down at the harbor. My place is at Harbor View, I said, more to myself than to her. My place is with my soldiers, not in an office signing checks. I'm a nurse, not a director. I turned back. I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the red scarf, the one I had taken back from her library. I laid it on her desk. Keep this, I said. It was a symbol of my humanity, a symbol of real warmth. It only has meaning when it's shared. I looked at her, this powerful, rich, lonely woman. You seem like you need it more than I do. I left her there, staring at the scarf. The final ghost appeared 3 days later. I was at the VA, charting at the nurses' station, my shift almost over. Murphy was yelling down the hall that the Jell-O tasted like sadness. It was a normal Tuesday. And then he was there. Elliot. He wasn't wearing a custom suit. He wasn't wearing a $5,000 watch. He was in jeans. A simple, worn-out pair of jeans and a gray sweater. He looked small. He hadn't shaved. The slick, confident man from the dinner party was gone. This was just a man. Nick, he said, his voice rough. The other nurses, sensing the tension, suddenly found other things to do. Elliot, I said, my voice neutral. I didn't stop charting. You're not allowed in this area. I know, I'm sorry. He stood there awkwardly, his hands shoved in his pockets. I had to. He took a deep breath. I came to apologize. I stopped typing. I looked up at him. I've had a lot of time to think, he said, staring at the floor. That night. What my mother did, and what I did. He finally met my eyes. They were clear, and they were filled with a profound, soul-crushing shame. You were right, he said, about everything. I was a coward. I was so busy trying to be right, to be the smart, realistic one, that I forgot how to be good. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I've lost everything. My mother, she's forcing me out of the fund. My partners are being investigated. I deserve all of it. He looked at me. But the part that kills me is you. I had you. And I told you to be quiet. I told you the best part of you was inelegant. A tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. I don't deserve you, Nick. I never did. I am so sorry. I believe in sincere apologies. I see them in the eyes of my men when they talk about the past. And this was a sincere apology. It was also too late. I closed the patient's chart. I accept your apology, Elliot, I said, and I meant it. His face flooded with a desperate hope. You do? Nick, can we? Can we just get a coffee? Can I start? I held up a hand, gently. I accept your apology, I said. But I don't accept us. The hope died. He understood. That's fair. He stood there for another moment, then turned to leave. Elliot, I called out. He stopped. I reached into my locker, dug into the pocket of my old jeans, the ones I'd worn that night at Walmart. I pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. I walked over and handed it to him. He opened it. It was the Walmart receipt. Faded, crinkled, but still readable. Total, $250, $80. What's this? He whispered. You said you wanted to earn it, I said. You wanted to be better. I looked him in the eye. That's the proof, I said. Proof that a single act of kindness can outlast all this shame. Keep it as a reminder. I watched him close his hand around the crumpled paper. Goodbye, Elliot. He nodded, unable to speak. He walked away. And for the first time, I felt free. It was over. Life moves on. After the storm, there is a quiet. Elliot disappeared. I heard through the hospital grapevine that he'd left Portland, maybe gone somewhere in the Midwest, trying to start over. He took the Walmart receipt with him. I hope truly that it helped him. 1 month after I'd given Elliot that receipt, the news broke. It wasn't in the gossip columns. It was on the front page of the Portland Press-Herald in the business section. Evelyn Trust restructures. Announces $5 million initial grant for veterans' health. I read the article over Murphy's shoulder in the break room. He was complaining that the announcement had bumped the sports section. Look at this, he grumbled. Some rich lady finally feeling guilty. I just smiled and kept reading. The article detailed the firing of the old board, Elliot's partners, and the establishment of a new, transparent allocation system. But it was the end of the article that made me stop. It was a small 2-inch square on the page. The new logo for the restructured Drayton Hope Fund, the caption read. It wasn't the old pretentious family crest. It was a simple, clean, modern graphic. A single red line, skillfully drawn, folded into the shape of a heart. I looked at the image, and I knew, in that moment, that Evelyn Drayton had finally found her faith. She wasn't just fixing a fund. She was trying to remember, as she'd said, what kindness looked like. She had found it. 3 years later. I'm still at Harbor View. I never left. I never took the corner office. But the office, sort of, came to me. The money from the Evelyn Trust, that first $5 million, and the millions that followed, it changed everything. We have a new wing now, dedicated to prosthetics. We have the best PTSD clinic in the state of Maine. And we started a new program, a rapid response fund for veterans and their families who fall through the cracks, the ones who can't wait for the bureaucracy. I'm the head of it. We call it Harbor Hope. I have an office now. It's small. It's not fancy. It still smells faintly of antiseptic and strong bad coffee. On my wall, there are 2 items, hanging side by side. On the left, in a simple black wooden frame, is the original red scarf. After the new fund was established, Evelyn had sent it to me. It arrived by courier, in a simple box. There was a 1-line note written in her sharp, spiky handwriting. It just said, "This belongs to the mission." And on the right, in a matching black frame, is a small, quiet, framed photograph. It's a portrait of Evelyn Drayton. She passed away, peacefully, in her sleep, about a year ago. I went to the funeral. I stood in the back. I didn't talk to anyone. I just paid my respects. She was a judge. She was a cynic. She was a broken mother. She was, in the end, an ally. I keep her portrait next to the scarf, a reminder that even the hardest cynics are just looking for a reason to believe. It's snowing today. A thick, heavy Maine snow is falling outside my window. The sky is a steel gray. It's just like that day, all those years ago. There's a soft knock on my door. A young woman is standing there. She can't be more than 25. She's twisting her hands nervously. "Ma'am," she says, Are you Sergeant Palmer?" The one who runs Harbor Hope? I am, I smile. But you can call me Nick. Come on in. She sits down. I can see the exhaustion in her eyes. The same exhaustion I've seen in 1,000 soldiers. I'm sorry to bother you, she says, her voice trembling. My husband, he's in the PTSD program. Sergeant Murphy, the old guy. He said you were the one to talk to. What's going on? I ask, leaning forward. It's my son. He has asthma. The pharmacy. Our insurance won't cover his new inhaler until the first of the month. The copay it's $300. I don't get paid until next Friday. And he's wheezing. She's starting to cry. I don't know what to do. The pharmacist said, rules are rules. I just listen. And I smile. I open the top drawer of my desk. I pull out a voucher book. The Harbor Hope Emergency Fund. I sign my name at the bottom of a voucher, tear it out, and slide it across the desk. You take this to the pharmacy, I say, my voice low and calm. It's a direct pay voucher. It's covered. Everything. You go get your son's medicine. The woman stares at the voucher. Then she stares at me. And she bursts into tears. Not quiet, polite tears. Real, shoulder-shaking, gasping sobs of relief. Oh my God, she whispers, covering her mouth. Oh my God, people don't do this. They don't do this anymore. I get up, walk around the desk, and hand her a box of tissues. I pat her on the shoulder. Maybe they should, I say softly. She leaves, clutching the voucher like it's a winning lottery ticket. I watch her walk down the hall, and then I turn back to my office. My eyes drift up to the wall. I look at the framed red scarf. The circle was closed. That one, small, quiet act of defiance in a Walmart, born from the memory of a fallen soldier. It wasn't just an act anymore. It was a legacy. It was hope. I look at the scarf, and then I look at the portrait of Evelyn next to it. We had our war, she and I. And in the end, we found our peace. I whisper the words to myself, to Price, to the old general, and to the stern woman in the frame. True honor is what you do when no one is watching. Thank you for walking this path with me. My story ended with a red scarf, but the journey of kindness, of truly seeing one another, is one we all share. My Harbor Hope was born from a moment when no one was watching. What about you? Do you have a Murphy in your life? Someone who saw your true value? If this story resonated with you, please let me know in the comments. I read them. Your support by liking and subscribing to this channel allows us to continue sharing these messages. Thank you for listening.